On this edition of Native Report, we head into the recording studio to learn about the creative process of composer Brent Michael Davids. We attend the American Indian Science and Engineering Society National Conference. And we learned about the legislative process behind the National Museum of the American Indian. We also learned something new about Indian country and hear from our elders on this Native Report.
Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux Community, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and the Blandin Foundation.
Hi, welcome to Native Report. I'm Stacy Thunder. The career of composer Brent Michael Davids spans over 35 years, and during that time he has won many awards, scored films, and taught students. He blends Eurocentric techniques of classical music with traditional Native music in a way that is rich in resonance.
I'm in a dub session all week this week. This is our last day. We're screening this film tomorrow morning over at St. Louis Park at a theater.
On most days, composer Brent Michael Davids can be found in his recording studio. Today, he's finishing a film score. He began composing at a young age.
At 16, I had no clue about being a composer at all. I took piano lessons when I was 8. And my sisters, I have 2 sisters, and they're younger than me, and they were better than me. So we each had to practice an hour in the house. And so after 3 hours of kids practicing piano, it was just horrible. And my 2 sisters were better than me, so they'd practice, and then it'd be the 3rd hour, and I'm worse. And it was just humiliating, so I quit right away. I had no clue about composing until I took music theory in high school. And then it's like a light bulb went off, and I realized people are writing this stuff. I got excited about it, and I was like, I want to try this, and it turned out I was really good. You know, I had a sort of a way of thinking about the notes and the relationships, and you've heard people say that mathematics is involved in music, and it is. It's sort of, it's not math in terms of numbers per se, it's relationships.
Davids can write in the style of any composer. He finished a piano concerto of his mentor, the late Louis Ballard.
I was good friends also with Louis Ballard in Santa Fe until he passed away. It's 2007, I think. Since 1979. Because my little goatee German professor noticed, that I was doing all these native interesting things in my works, and he said, I think there's another native composer, his encyclopedic knowledge, and he looked him up, and then I wrote Louis a note, and he wrote me back, and we were, sort of friends and colleagues ever since. I've been to his house a lot and visited him, and he's been here too in the studio, and I finished his final piano concerto. He had passed away right when he was writing a piano concerto. He'd written sketches for the first movement, and then he passed away. So the pianist in the orchestra came to me and asked if I wouldn't finish it, being familiar with his work. And when I first started composing, I was what's known as a stylist. So I would compose music in the style of someone else. Mozart, Beethoven, any composer, even non-classical music too. So, anything I can hear, I can write down and imitate.
Do you have anything coming up we should watch for?
We're doing this Dakota music tour, so we're visiting a couple of native communities and then a couple cities. One of the pieces we're doing is called Black Hills Olawan, and it's for Mazakute, which is the native singing group, in Santee, Nebraska, which is from this area over here in Winona and Mankato. And then another piece that's being performed is Powwow Symphony, which is an orchestral powwow. So I used to use this example to teach what's the difference between Western music and Native American music. If you have an orchestra on stage, which is like one of the supreme examples of Western music, you have an orchestra giving one-way communication to the audience, and the audience is sitting there taking it all in, right? And you don't even have to pay attention to the orchestra musicians. They all wear black to hide their individual identity. You're not supposed to notice that they're there, even, but sort of wash yourself in the sound coming from the stage. So the music is really about the sound, as if it's a thing. That can be embedded on CDs and sold and everything. So it's a commodity. Whereas a powwow, the music is really different. It's multivalent. The communication goes 2 ways, 3 ways, multiple ways, all at the same time. Everyone's dressed in bright colors. You don't know sometimes who's a performer and who's not. The lines are blurred. People are eating, walking around, talking. There could be some, ceremony going on in the midst of a powwow, which is really important. People stand, pay attention to it, and then they're off doing other things. And it's, every which way this communication is happening. It's not just one way from the stage to the audience. And what I realize is that it would be fun to put those two together and try and get Native people into the concert hall to experience, orchestra music, which is sort of my realm, really. And then introduce classical concert goers to the idea of a powwow.
His process of writing music has evolved over the years.
It starts in many different ways. I used to start, when I was training, I'd start one way always, and that was to go for any kind of harmonic or melodic material. But now that I am where I am now, I start in many different ways, and it's more like a puzzle. I'm a master composer, really. I can pretty much write anything. I can write it from my head onto the paper, so it's not, I don't even use a piano or anything anymore.
As a composer, Davids has to know all of the instruments. He even invented several of his own instruments.
To do what I do, I had to learn pretty much all the instruments eventually to know how, how low does a flute play, or how low does an oboe play, and how high do they play, and those sorts of things I need to know. I was working with Michael Wheeler in a glass shop, and he said, "Oh, we have quartz." He noticed that quartz rings a lot when he pulls a rod out of his little cubby hole. He had kept these crystal rods, and he'd pull one out and it would ring. And I was like, oh, I want to make a flute out of that. So I started learning glass blowing techniques from him, and together we made this a soprano quartz flute. Then I had a professor who went to the Smithsonian it's the Library of Congress collection. And they have all these different flutes, and they have glass and lead crystal flutes, and some of them are all etched and gold inlaid and all sorts of really beautiful flutes. But they had a whole collection of crystal flutes, and I thought I had an original, so I went back and made a flute twice as big as anything in the Library of Congress collection. So I have, I think, the only bass quartz flute in existence.
Do you have any other advice in general for those who are interested in composing?
When I was in high school, I asked my band director, who was teaching me music theory, and I said that I was interested in maybe pursuing a career as a composer and getting trained in it. And he said, a music degree and a dime will get you a cup of coffee. That's what he said. And that's almost true. I mean, it's very hard to make a career in this profession. So if you're going to do it, I mean, I still recommend following your dreams if it's really what you want to do. But be smart about it. Have a backup plan. Have plan B. But I think mostly don't give up. Just keep going, because if you keep going, eventually you'll outlast some of the conditions or the challenges that you face you can overcome them simply with longevity.
Now go back to the monastery.
Did you know the mission of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, ACES, is to increase the representation of American Indians and Alaska Natives in engineering, science, and other related technology disciplines? Since 1977, ACES has employed a full circle of support model that begins with pre-college programs, progresses into collegiate life, and then into the professional years of members, and then on into retirement. ACES works to promote and provide educational services for American Indian and Alaska Native higher education students. ACES also supports early and mid-level professionals through development, mentoring, community service, and award program initiatives. ACES is the only professional society established by and for American Indian and Alaska Natives that specifically emphasizes lifelong learning and educational achievement by utilizing cultural aspects in science and engineering.
Next, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society National Conference brings together students, educators, and professionals for an unparalleled event each fall. The conference is the highlight of the year for many.
On this fall day, the Minneapolis Convention Center is busy with activity at the American Indian Science and Engineering Society National Conference.
This conference is important because it brings together a number of Native American people, students, professionals, and educators, and it gets us all kind of on the same page so that we can all sort of working kind of more seamlessly and helping students to get to the position of, if they're going from high school to college, we have people here that can help them get there, college into graduate school, from graduate school into the professions. There's people at all the levels that can help students get through the process. The original intent behind ACES was that the National Indian Education Association had just begun. So we had an avenue for Native Americans to get education. And so the ACES came together as a professional organization. We're one of the few professional nonprofit organizations. We're tax-exempt professional association that was first developed by professionals, Native Americans who were already in their professions. And over the years, I think that we've kind of gradually changed to where we became more influential in the development of the professional. So rather than just focusing on the professional, it's on how do we get this kid to this profession.
In addition to the professional development tracks and workshop opportunities for attendees, the conference also boasts the largest career fair across Indian country.
So far, I've met a few people at Boeing. That's one place I would like to do an internship, and I had a long talk with one of the recruiters there, and it was really nice. Not only were we talking about internship opportunities, but we were also talking about different locations and what he likes to do part of it. So it's kind of nice to see why they go into the career that they're going. And then talking to a few schools about grad school. So talking to the GEM scholarship scholars about getting doing grad school and having them pay for it. I think more Natives should get into the field I'm looking in because we will bring a new aspect of the different problems, because I feel like so many people, have one-minded kind of thing, kind of thinking. We kind of look at things as a whole, like Mother Earth and Father Sky and those kind of aspects, which I don't think engineers at Purdue or anybody take into consideration. I feel like we are more in tune with the environment and protecting the environment and knowing that we share this earth together, so we have to preserve it.
I'm here with my school, Sowen College, and we're here to kind of network with different companies, and so probably get an internship or, kind of looking for the future basically. I started out with the internship at Bureau of Land Management, and so that's what kind of helped me push forward petroleum engineering, chemical engineering. So It's a big place, and it's a good place to go to meet people and make friends and know different companies, and so it's a good opportunity.
With the amount of networking and the sheer number of people, professions, and businesses represented at ACES, there are stories of success.
We had a discussion on the board of directors just the other day about the number of people who started out as students in ACES who are now kind of top in their professions, their faculty, their department chairs in their departments, their directors, their managers of departments, their owners of businesses. But these all are people who started out as high school students, and they all got the support of ACES and all the way through, and so now they're giving back to ACES.
I got introduced to ACES very early in college. My first ACES conference was in Portland, Oregon in 2000, and I've come every year since then. I got a lot of scholarship opportunities coming through ACES. I was able to take advantage of a lot of summer programs, different kinds of training programs, mentoring opportunities the whole way through college that helped me get into medical school. As a medical student, I would come and set up a table here and try to get people interested in medicine and all of the programs that are helpful to people. I myself am a heart specialist. Cardiovascular disease kills more Indians every year than any other disease, and in most cases many other diseases combined. The health disparities are great, and the need for American Indian doctors serving American Indians that need is overwhelming.
Being in the presence of so many Native students, educators, and professionals gathered for a great purpose is inspiring.
I would like to work with a company like Boeing and everything and help promote the STEM fields in Native culture. So, like, probably want to go back to my native land in Gallup, New Mexico. I'm part of the Navajo tribe, and maybe do some programs out there and try to get kids interested into the STEM fields and showing them what they are capable of and what they can do.
I'm not a scientist myself. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not an engineer. I'm an educator. My degree is in education, and so just that philosophy of indigenous ways of knowing and how that can be consistent with science is lost so often. And I think the value that I bring is that I can go out and I can reach the students, and we can talk about how their culture only enhances their profession.
What I tell people about ACES is that you come, you discover ACES, you learn to become part of it, and then you learn to make ACES happen. You come and you bring the opportunities for the new people who are coming in. And like many things in Native American beliefs and traditions, it is circular.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
The Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin was the first tribe terminated in June of 1954. We were the first tribe restored in December of 1973. And this was such a historic reversal of American Indian policy, going from termination to restoration, that our tribe is very famous, but all tribes and many other entities in the outside world are very impressed that a small tribe could bring about such a historic reversal of American Indian policy. We didn't do this by ourselves. It was a grassroots movement. Our government, the U.S. government, is vast in its powers. They have imposed, or the government has imposed, laws for all the citizens, and I should note that the American Indians and Alaska Natives are the most regulated and law-imposed group in our country. And I did see a figure once that there were around 5,000 laws, policies, attorney general's opinions, Supreme Court decisions. So that gives you the idea of how intrusive the federal government has been to Native life at every level.
As Chief Counsel for the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, Patricia Zell has seen the legislative process behind the establishment of the National Museum of the American Indian. This is a behind-the-scenes story seldom heard.
On this morning at the National Congress of American Indians annual gathering, Patricia Zell is discussing her role in many policy issues affecting Native nations.
In 1975, I learned about the American Indian Policy Review Commission, which was a two-year commission set up by the House and the Senate of the United States to review Indian policy. And Indian policy hadn't been reviewed comprehensively since the 1930s, when the Miriam report was issued. The commission issued its report to the Congress in July of 1977 and had, I think, 110 recommendations. Those recommendations became the impetus for the reestablishment of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee.
Senator Inouye assumed the duties as chair in 1987, and there was an increase in the number of senators wanting to serve. Of the many pieces of legislation Patricia worked on, the one that stands out most had its beginnings in New York.
There was an avid, somewhat almost demented collector who came out of New York. His name was George Gustav High, and he amassed a collection of over 1 million objects and artifacts from Indian country. He would go into Indian country, into a reservation, and he would buy everything in sight. Cooking utensils, clothing, everything. And he amassed this great collection, kept it in his apartment in New York. His wife said at one point, you either put this collection someplace else or I'm leaving, and he chose the collection over his wife. And ultimately a museum was built around, was physically built, but and housed that collection in New York for many years. It was called the Museum of the American Indian, and this is what was the seat of the museum. Senator Inouye assumed the chair of the committee in January of '87. 1 month later, in February of '87, the committee held a hearing on a bill to provide for the repatriation of Native American human remains if they were found on federal lands in the national parks and the Forest Service lands. That was a bill introduced by Senator John Melcher. And in the course of taking testimony on the bill, the Secretary of the Smithsonian testified, and the chairman asked him whether they had Native American human remains in Smithsonian's collection, and he said, "Oh yes, we have about 18,500 human remains of Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, and American Indians."
The idea was to create a national monument for those remains that could not be identified, much like the tomb of the unknown soldier.
We quickly learned that the National Park Service had jurisdiction over the building of monuments on the mall, and we met with the National Park Service, and they said, well, there's only one site left on the mall, and that has been reserved for the Smithsonian for a museum of man. So we made a trip to New York in April of that year. The senator invited the Secretary of the Smithsonian to come with us. The Smithsonian, once they saw the collection, had a very keen interest in acquiring that collection and bringing it down to Washington.
The city and the state of New York resisted that idea, and the George Gustav Hay Trust required the museum to always have a presence in New York City.
To make a long story short, we developed legislation to authorize the establishment of the museum. That was enacted into law in November of 1989. And in September of 2004, the museum opened. There were thousands of Native people from North, Central, and South America that came to the National Mall. And I always get choked up when I talk about this, but because thousands of people dressed in their native dress walked toward the Capitol to reclaim their proper place in history. And it was incredibly moving to have all those people feel that they were reclaiming not only their proper place in history, but a principal place at the foot of the Capitol, the base of the Capitol, a prominent place that Native people, the first Americans, rightfully deserved to occupy.
For more information about Native Report or the stories we've covered, you can find us at nativereport.org and on Facebook. Thank you for spending this time with your friends and neighbors here on Native Report. I'm Stacy Thunder. Hope to see you next time.
Stacy Thunder is a member of and legal counsel for the Red Lake Nation, and Tad Johnson is a member of the Boys Fort Band of Chippewa and is chair for the American Indian Studies Department on the campus of the University of Minnesota Duluth. Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee-Mdewakanton Sioux Community, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and the Blandin Foundation.